He is John Ramdeen. He is Robin Black. We have a number of items to discuss. Currently in Las Vegas, the ABC is holding their annual conference and going over a number of different issues that affect the sport, which we are an outlet that actually does pay attention to a lot of this stuff. And the ABC has passed a number of different clarifications to the unified rules, which were passed back in 2000. And some of the key components are kind of looking at the judging criteria, and in particular, wanting to see more liberal use of 10-8s and kind of the old 10-8 thinking that should be reserved for a 10-7, where almost a fight is being on the verge of being stopped, and looking at dominance, duration, and damage, which they are calling impact, because apparently in 2016, we can't watch MMA and think damage. That's just too scary for critics out there.
Yeah, very, very strange that it just comes down to the wording. And, you know, I understand what the ABC's trying to do. You know, they're trying to make a safer sport, more fan-friendly sport. But you mentioned having 10-8 rounds. Those three things, that three criteria, in order for you to get a 10-8 round, you have to have all of those. But they want to be liberal and give out 10-8 rounds. And I've never been a huge fan of giving away 10-8 rounds, because essentially you and I are fighting. You get a 10-8 round. I have to win the next two rounds just to get a draw. So you're essentially really screwing the fighters.
Or you have to equal what I just did to you.
If done properly, that sounds right. If I just lay one on you for a round and you edge me out in two, to me, that's a draw.
Yeah.
You know, but the problem is implementing it right, because you got three human beings there. Not three robots or not three machines that acquire information and process data. And
that'll be a few conventions down the road.
Yeah, that'll be coming up in the future. They're humans, and no matter how we do it, and Big John is on the forefront of this stuff, and he's exactly the right guy to be on the forefront of it. He cares so much, and he spent so much time. You know, my friend Jaron Villal had a bad night in Ottawa. He did. And in the back, right after, we saw Big John and him going over it very intensely. And that wasn't for public consumption. We just happened to be there. And that's the right thing to do. Jaron's a human being. He's a good ref who had a bad night. And his friend and mentor went back there and laid it to him. We don't know what they said, but John is the right guy for that kind of stuff. A couple other interesting things. The hand down. Yeah. You got this thing down. You're playing this game.
No more.
Trying not to get kicked in the head. No more. Both hands flat.
Or fist.
Both fists on the ground. Or one hand flat and one fist. Makes sense. The game of playing that is a dangerous game that you think you're mastering, but really you're this far away from getting kicked in the head, and that's what they wanted to get rid of. I really like the change of that rule.
Yeah, they're also looking at, heel kicks to the kidneys, for instance, doesn't need to be something that is restricted. As well as manipulating the clavicle as well. So a lot of kind of getting into the weeds when it comes to MMA rules. But the big one, I think, is going to be the judging that they looked at. You mentioned the grounded opponent as well. I think if for nothing else, at least we do have some criteria. I don't think anyone, if I were to poll 100 people about what a 10-8 round is, you might get 100 different responses. There is no concrete. And certainly if there's two of those 3Ds, it's encouraged that you can give them a 10-8. If all three, then it should definitely be a 10-8. At least we're getting something concrete. But to your point, John, I think you're skeptical, and with good reason, because we have to see the implementation and how are these judges educated about this and getting out of old habits which have been ingrained in them since the unified rules were introduced.
And it also comes down to, there was a vote on this, and New Jersey didn't vote on this, and it's like, okay, it seems strange because New Jersey seems to be ahead of the pack commission-wise when it comes to mixed martial arts, but why aren't they on board when it comes to...
Don't ask Randy Couture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Randy didn't appreciate, they did kind of condescend the fighters a little bit. Anyone who's ever fought probably didn't appreciate it much. But how do you make the judges and the refs and all of these people do a better job? I'm not here to sell Big John's course, but that seems to be one of the stable ways to do it. If anybody, people will email me sometimes or on Twitter or whatever, how do I be a judge or a ref? Go take John's course. That is the Bible on how to ref and judge.
So a lot of important stuff. It may not be as sexy as some of the other news stories out there, but a lot of important stuff going down this week in Las Vegas. Let's shift on over to some fights. And Tony Ferguson and Rafael dos Anjos, not officially announced, but looks to be the main event for November 5th in Mexico City, which is important when you're discussing elevation. Are you surprised that this is the fight they're going to? Did you think Tony Ferguson was in line for a title fight with what he's done?
Yeah, maybe, but what's interesting is Robin and I were calling some pancrase fights today, and we called a fight with Lando Venata. This guy, I know you look at Tony Ferguson's last performance against Venata, and he looked like he was in big trouble. People were like, wait a second. Maybe Tony Ferguson isn't that good. No, Lando Venata is that good. For him to come in on short notice and take this fight with Tony Ferguson. Ferguson ended up getting the victory, but you would imagine if Venata had a longer training camp and was preparing for Ferguson that, you know, things may have gone differently. But I think this is great. I think when you look at 155 pounds, there's no clear path to the championship. You have to beat a slew of fighters, and if you can get a win over the former champion, you just put yourself in a better position. We have to remember, it also comes down to selling pay-per-views too. So you go out, you smoke RDA, and then the world will notice, and then maybe you'll get some more pay-per-view buys.
Yeah, to that point on Groovy Lando, that was 2013. We went back and watched, commentated in Pancrase. This kid was super slick then. You saw way beyond just the building blocks of what you saw in 2016. Very cool fighter. It's going to be really fun to watch him fight. He's got to keep growing, keep focused, not buy into this stuff. All these people are saying about how good he is. Just stay focused on what he does. But yeah, Tony, you know, Tony wants these big fights. And Tony going in and going toe-to-toe with an innovative guy he knew almost nothing about shows you what kind of heart Tony has. But it's got to be a different fight against RDA. RDA, you know what he is, and what he is pressure, pressure, pressure. Tony's got to move on the outside, create new angles, make RDA turn into him and catch him turning in. That's a hard fight. RDA is going to have something to prove after getting laid out by Eddie. Yeah.
So with these two lightweights accounted for in November, it kind of eliminates a number of options for whoever Eddie Alvarez is going to defend that title against. Khabib Nurmagomedov, you could certainly make the argument, is the guy next in line. However, to your point, John, about what is going to make the most business sense, there's a very compelling argument that if Nate Diaz wins this second fight with Conor McGregor, you could just usher him into a lightweight title fight immediately.
True, but you have to ask Nate Diaz, because Nate Diaz says, I don't care about titles. Those are completely irrelevant. Give me big fights. Is Eddie Alvarez a fighter that can sell a big fight? For you, yes. Yes, from a martial arts standpoint, from if you've been watching MMA for any length of time, Eddie Alvarez is your guy. But do the masses know who Eddie Alvarez is? Because they certainly know who Nathan Diaz is. And I think Nate wants somebody that can carry their share of the weight when it comes to selling the fights and making the fights as big as possible so he can line his pockets.
I'm starting to also realize, and we have to talk about it because it's reality, but this whole everybody's looking for the biggest fight, and there's a lot of people that respond really negatively to Tyron Woodley trying to find fights with George St. Pierre and Nick Diaz because, you know, there's a Wonder Boy who's earned it, right? And they make a very valid point. Are we now just going to ignore any of it because we accept that truth despite the fact that we want to see the best fighters fight? And I love Nick Diaz, and I would love to see that guy fight for a title, but that doesn't make any sense. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is the best welterweight in the world, and Tyron Woodley knows full well that he's a way more dangerous fight than either of those bigger money fights. Makes sense, risk reward. You want the big money, less risk, but Stephen Thompson will lay that man out.
We don't have time to get to a number of fights that have been announced for Portland. We'll chat about that later this week, but tune in Saturday night as we will have the prelims here in Canada with a preview show beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Time leading into the card this Saturday night from Salt Lake City, Utah.